Bluegrass Jamalong is proud to be sponsored by Collins Guitars and Mandolins, each and every one built from the sound up in Austin, Texas. Hi, this is Matt, and you're listening to Bluegrass Jamalong, the podcast for anyone and everyone who loves bluegrass. Hey everybody, welcome back to Bluegrass Jamalong. This is a bite-sized episode featuring Wyatt Rice. I say it's a bite-sized episode. It's slightly longer than some of the bite-sized ones, but I just listened back and there was nothing that I wanted to cut out of this, so I've left it as it is. It's the chunk from the first part of the Church Street Blues 40th anniversary episodes that I did pretty much exactly 2 years ago. I was looking back through my calendar and I realised that I'd spoken to Wyatt 2 years ago, just a few days gone by. And so I listened back and I just wanted to put this out again because it was such a great conversation to have. One of the most special bits of having done this podcast, I think, for me so far. It was quite a quiet chat, but just felt really meaningful and just fascinating listening to Wyatt. I remember recording Church Street Blues with Tony when he was a teenager, chatting a bit about the Martins and the Ovations, and, you know, him being equally as baffled by Tony playing an Ovation at first until he understood sort of what it was they loved about them. Just some memories of recording, being in the studio, spending time with him, hanging out. Just a really special chat to get to have, and I loved every minute of it. There is a longer version of this. Wyatt chatted about all sorts of stuff that wasn't really related to Church Street Blues, and so I put out a full episode with him a little bit later as well. I'll stick a link in the show notes in case you want to go and check that out too, as well as links to the full almost 5 hours in the end of interviews about Church Street Blues itself with people like Tim Stafford and Brian Sutton and like a whole host of people. They were fabulous. Alison Krauss is in there. It was extraordinary. But this is a chat with Wyatt, and I was delighted to listen back to this. I really enjoyed it. I hope you enjoy it again if you've heard it before. I hope if you haven't heard it before, you get something out of this. I believe it was the first interview Wyatt had done with anybody since Tony passed, and like I said before, it just felt incredibly special. I will let you make your own mind up. Here is my chat with Wyatt Rice about recording Church Street Blues with his brother Tony.
I was trying to figure out a while ago, to the best of my memory, the timeline in which a lot of this stuff went down, and I always keep looking back, remembering that we had recorded Church Street Blues before the Backwaters record. But I could be wrong about that. But that's my memory of it anyway. There was a lot happening during that. I mean, everything happened so quick. You know, at the time, Tony, you know, he was just living in California. And I was living in Florida, so if I back up a little bit in time, he used to send me and my brother Ronnie, you know, tapes and stuff, you know, he would send us rough mixes on cassette to listen to before records came out and stuff. Even when I was about 10 or 11 years old, me and my mom and dad flew out to California to see Tony for a visit. That was really exciting for me at that young of an age, because we had a jam session the next night. He had David Grisman and Daryl Anger come over, and we had a jam session, and we're going to stay a couple days and then fly back. And then I asked my mom, I said, I'd spoken to Tony about it first. I said, man, I'd like to stay. He says, well, see what Mom has to say about it. Because I was supposed to go home and go back to school. And then Mom says, well, I'm going to talk to Dad about it. And he was a little stricter. So in the end, I got my way. I got to stay. And during this time, I actually got to stay a couple weeks I think Tony and my mom had a lot to do with that, talking my dad into letting me stay. So that meant me flying back home by myself and I remember Tony saying, "Oh, he'll be just fine. Don't worry about it." He said, "We'll make sure he gets to the plane." And so you can imagine, I'm just, like I said, 10 or 11 during this period. So after mom and dad left, Tony, like every day we went to like Grisman's house. This was during the time that they were rehearsing to do the first David Grisman quintet record. So they would have rehearsals at Grisman's house. And I was there for a lot of, all that. And at the same time, Tony was recording a solo record, one just called Tony Rice, that was on Rounder Records. It's the one that had a few songs on it I can remember, like Banks of the Ohio and the Grisman tune there, Rattlesnake. That happened first, and then I was just blown away as a kid about this new acoustic music. I kind of knew then, I said, man, this is what I want to do one of these days. So fast forward in time, when I turned, 16, 17 years old, I used to call Tony up and bug him on the phone. He knew that I wanted to play really bad, so some of the tunes, like I learned back then, was like one of the first ones is one he wrote. He showed me a few chords to it. Prior to that time, I just knew, some bluegrass tunes and flat picking tunes and such, and nothing too much about that music that I was so excited about. Anyway, yeah, fast forward to when I was 17 years old, Tony had called me. And I can't remember, like I said, I can't remember absolutely the timeline on this of which record was recorded first. I always keep remembering that it was Church Street. So I was so excited about it. I said, man, I've really hit it big time this time. I said, I'm going to go to a studio and record. So Tony flew me out. There was a lot of flying. I mean, like I said, a lot happened, man. I was flying back and forth, 2 or 3 times during those years, 1982. And I stayed out there with him for quite a while, almost a year or two. So, yeah, I fly in at the San Francisco, airport, and he picks me up and we go to his place, and it all happened so quickly, He says, here's the tunes. He says, I want you to play rhythm on these tunes for me, which was Gold Rush, Jerusalem Ridge was one, and Cattle on the Cane. And there was another one that was a vocal tune that had to be the last one that was recorded. That was the End of the Night. That's the last one he did on the record, was one called Pride of Man. And I wasn't expecting to play any rhythm on that. And this happened in a period of a short time span of, 3 days for the whole record.
Right.
If my memory recalls right. So I was just in heaven, man. I was so happy to be there doing what I was doing, even though if it's just, playing rhythm.
And the rhythm playing on that record is brilliant. I mean, it doesn't sound like somebody's first time in the studio, or there's no, the quality of the rhythm playing is, you can't imagine anybody else having gone in and done it better. It works perfectly on that record. It's astonishing to hear that was pretty much one of your first experiences of being in a studio.
Yeah. Like I said, for me, I was like in heaven doing this. And I didn't have a worry in the world. That I wasn't nervous or anything. Back during that time, I was just so excited about it. At the time, he was living in Corte Madera, California. And in his house there, we went, one night we had, messed around and played the tunes. Gold Rush, I kind of already knew. And Jerusalem Ridge and Cat on the Cane was one I wasn't too familiar with, but we sit there and practice, went over it a few times, and that was basically it. And then the next day we went to the studio and started recording it. And we'd record one or two takes of it, then that was it. And he would keep the best take. And it was all, live. It was no overdubs or nothing. So very exciting.
And did it, sort of talking to other people about that record, it feels to people like it was really different from everything else Tony was doing at that time, to the extent that it said in Tim Stafford and Caroline Wright's book, he took it to the label and they weren't that interested in it. So he took it somewhere else. It feels like, listening back for me, it's such a perfect record, but it feels like it was not what people were expecting.
Yeah, I recall some of that too, of him being on the phone, making phone calls to Rounder. And I remember him being kind of upset about it, although I didn't really say anything. I'm just in the background, trying to practice guitar. I had my own little room, but I'd kind of overheard some stuff, and he come out, and I was kind of asking him about it, and he says, man, and he was telling, me that they didn't think that was the right direction for him to take right then, was to do a solo record. They wanted like another bluegrass type record. He kind of he was a little mad about it. So I think he made something else happen. He made a phone call to Barry Paul's at Sugar Hill, and they said, yes, we'll do it, Tony. So, and that's how that came along. And so it always makes me think now, I mean, I think it's one of the more, all of his records are really good. But that one being a solo record, do you think that, I know probably after it came out, I bet Rounder wishes now that they would have done it. So
yeah, totally.
I don't know.
And a couple of people I've spoken to, like Bob, I spoke to Bob Minner about this, and a couple of people said one of the things that makes that record special is that Tony didn't really do another one like it. It's not like one in a long line of singer-songwriter style albums. It's special because it was a one-off.
Yeah. He already had, he had it planned out what he wanted to do, and had it, he already knew in his head exactly what he wanted to do for that record. So, and previous records, and the ones after that too. He always had a in his mind exactly what he wanted to do.
And do you remember which guitars you used on Church Street Blues? I'm guessing Tony probably played the D28.
Yes, he used his D28. At the time, I had a 68 D18 I used on Church Street Blues. And I also used it some on Backwaters too, with the exception of one song. Because on the Backwaters record, he used an Ovation on a lot of cuts, with the exception of 2 or 3 tunes. I know in the book it says 1 tune, but there's 2 other tunes I think he used that on the Backwaters record. When he had both guitars there, but there's something about the Ovation. That's one of the first guitars, like when I showed up at his place that I seen, it was like the couch guitar. He had it laying up in his chair in the living room. and it's the first time I'd ever seen one. And I said, man, what's this? And he said, that's an Ovation. And he kept it all out all the time and was playing on it and practicing on it. So I kind of looked at it for a few minutes and then played down and I said, man, I want to see where's the Martin at? At a young age like that, I didn't know what was going on with the Ovation. I just, it played okay, but it didn't sound like, a dreadnought. Or at least during that time period, I didn't learn until later on. And, it's what he's seen in those guitars. They real easy to play and they recorded very well. So.
And I guess if you've got two guitars going on at the same time and one of them's a D28, one's an Ovation, they're going to take up slightly different spots in the mix for each other.
Yeah. But he had a way of doing it with his, with his right hand on some stuff. You can't tell which one is which. Depending on what the tune is, I guess.
I think that's the thing, is that idea that the tone comes from the player. That's sort of the perfect example of it. If you can't tell if it's a dreadnought or an Ovation, then that tells you where the tone's coming from, doesn't it?
Yes. For Church Street Blues, we had already recorded, I know the songs that I recorded on the rhythm parts had already been done. I thought I was finished. And he had done his solo stuff in there, and I was in the control room the whole time, just hanging out, watching this all go down. So, and when it came to the last tune on the third night, the third or fourth night, maybe, I can't remember. I'm going to say the third night because I believe it was 3 days. The last tune that he played was Pride of Man. So he went and played it, and he came in the control room after he finished the tune and got Bob Shoemaker to play it back a couple times. He says, you know what? He said, he looks at me, he says, Wyatt, he says, go in there and sit where I sit. And he says, my D28's right there. He said, get my D28. And he said, on Pride of Man, that song I just recorded, he said, when I take my solo there, he said, I want you to play rhythm behind me. So I said, okay. I had never played the tune before, but I'd heard it, in the control room. So I in my head, I knew the changes already. So I sit down and just played the rhythm to that. What he wanted. That was one of those spur of the moment things that I wasn't expecting. So, but it worked out pretty good. I was pretty excited about that and that's the last thing that went on the record.
It's amazing because it's one of those that you listen to now and people are still discovering that record to this day. And if you get people to list the records where everything's like, there's not a no out of place, everything hangs together beautifully, it's all perfect, it just sounds so together. The idea that you just sort of went in, picked up Tony's guitar and played some rhythm on a song you hadn't played before, and that's part of that record. Spur of the moment thing.
He was kind of celebrating that the record was over, and he had a smile on his face in the control room when he looked at me. I'll never forget it. It's one of those things that always sticks with you, I thought I was really something. I said, man, I got to play on a record with my brother, and I was so tickled with that. I mean, I was like, man, this is great. And that time being 17, I'm thinking now, I said, golly, I got to go back to Florida and go back to the shipyard. It's like after doing this, something clicked in my brain. It's like, you know what? I'd already made up my mind before that kind of, but this is like the icing on the cake after being in the studio. It's like, I want to play music with my brother, Tony. And I said, I'm going to do everything I can to make that happen. After that, things started, he had other things going on. Like you said, the Bluegrass Album Band. And then it came to a point where he wanted to do a unit band and make a go of that. That actually started it out as we were going to do this duet thing for a little while and do a tour. And we actually did do a couple of shows up in Canada that were based off the Church Street Blues record. And it was just me and him at the time. And the Country Gentleman happened to be at one of the gigs up in Canada that we went to. And I think he had already been talking to Jimmy Gaudreau. They had been friends for a long time, since the 70s. But Jimmy Gaudreau had been playing, with the Country Gentleman. So we had this gig up in Canada. It was me and Tony playing this two guitar thing, and he was going to do, it was based off of Church Street Blues and a few other tunes. And while we were there, I think we played a few tunes, and then we took a break, and then he went back and asked Jimmy Gaudreau. He says, "Man, you want to get up, play a few tunes with me and Wyatt?" And Gaudreau said, "Yeah." And then after the show, they talked more about it, and then the next thing I know, it happened so quick. Next thing I know, we got somebody that's booking shows for us. And then Tony had asked Jimmy, he says, "Man, a good bass player?" And he says, "Yeah." He says, "I know this guy named Mark Schatz." And so the next gig we played at, we got a band with Jimmy Gaudreau and Mark Schatz. And then that particular unit right there was formed.
I mean, that's an amazing few years.
Yeah. So, and that was really, really exciting times for me. All of it was. And I miss him dearly. So, yeah, but Church Street Blues was a fun record to do and, be a part of. And I'm glad I got to do it.
Bluegrass Jamalong is proud to be sponsored by Collins Guitars and Mandolins, each and every one built from the sound up in Austin, Texas.